everybody, my name's Colin Ellis, author of Culture Fix, Culture Hacks, and the Hybrid Handbook. On the Culture Makers podcast, I ask leaders from around the world to share a little bit of their story and what works well for them in the world of workplace culture. I hope you enjoy today's show. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Culture Makers podcast. Very excited about today's episode. You can probably hear it in my voice already because I'm talking to a leader who thrives on getting things done. Hassanah is already laughing. Yeah, hopefully I'm not contradicting anything she's going to say. Actually, I don't enjoy getting things done. So Hassanah is the head of people and culture at Bright, based in Sydney. But more recently than that, she was named Corporate Talent Leader of the Year, which she's definitely going to talk more about. She's got over 20 years people experience in 3 countries in the public and private sector, is originally from Manchester in the UK, which we're not going to hold against her. She describes herself as being high energy and passionate, which, having met her, is a massive understatement. But also known she can hold a tune at karaoke. Hassanah, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for lying about my ability to sing.
We went to karaoke after a HR conference where we'd all been speaking, and that's what we decided was a kind of a good antidote to the day.
Well, I didn't. I was trying desperately hard for you all not to go there, but it turns out most of you all could sing.
I've got like 2 songs that I sing at karaoke, like Hey Jude by the Beatles and Wonderwall by Oasis. Like, you know, just guaranteed easy to sing.
Yeah. I think I drank the gin and let you all sing.
It was a big jug of gin, wasn't it? I seem to remember.
Really large.
So thank you so much for joining me. Oh my gosh, where to start? So obviously Manchester is home. People will be able to hear that in your accent when I actually give you an opportunity to talk. Kind of growing up there, what was your first job? Did you went to university there? What did you study?
Yeah, so I innately struggled at school with dyslexia. And no matter how hard I worked, I could never sort of like hit the grades and things like that. But I'd done dancing for years and sort of basically decided, right, well, I'll go and do something along those lines. And so I actually went off to college to do drama and theatre arts and all of those things. So I've actually got an A-level in dance, which is like so useful across all those. But I sort of came out the back end of that and realising a couple of things. I quite like money and I was not very good at acting. So combining the two, I felt I would be like extraordinarily poor for many years because I think you need to have a modicum of talent in the acting field to actually make it. So I spent a bit of time not really knowing what I wanted to do. You know, I ended up, actually my first job was in a care home. I just took a part-time job in a care home, an elderly people's care home for a few years. Fell into a job in an insurance company, worked in the office in the garage, a few of those things. And then how I sort of fell into sort of like the people world, I had moved from Manchester down to Oxford. And back in those days, because I'm very old, so this is all, you know, effectively pre-computers, you walked into the job centre to see what jobs they had. And so I did that and had a chat with a few people. And by the end of the conversation, one of the guys said, "Do you know there's a job going here? Don't you?" And that was my first introduction into it. I ended up setting up a temp desk inside of the job centre in Oxford to sort of like aid some of those things on and sort of stayed with it from there. But yeah, when I was younger, I was like, oh, I'll be a famous actor or I'll be a barrister. But I was also not smart enough to pass any of those things.
So you haven't got an Oscar, but you have got a Corporate Talent Leader of the Year award. We'll get to that. I don't want to jump straight to that. I feel like that's going to be the cherry on top of the icing on top of the cake. So a couple of things. Firstly about I was joking with the kids the other day, you know, the way I got a job is I wrote for one and I got one and I could afford a house, like both things that they have no chance of doing anymore, which I'm laughing about it because I'm the dad. The second thing is about dyslexia. And obviously it's great now that there's way more awareness of just how these things affect our learning abilities. And obviously having been in the people business for years and years and years, that's something that we're way more empathetic, compassionate. And about now. It's not a barrier. Whereas in when we were younger, it was such a barrier, wasn't it?
Oh, huge. And to be honest with you, it's a weird thing, but I had huge shame around it for many years. You know, you develop, you know, if you've got some form of sort of like learning difficulty, you develop over time workarounds to it. So, you find your way around it. But actually admitting the reason I was spending for ages on a particular document or something on those lines was actually the dyslexia was making me hard to remember how to spell the word "the" at that particular point was really hard. It was only, I would say only about sort of 8 years ago, I actually started to go, no, this is actually, I do have dyslexia. It's a weird thing, but you actually have shame around it. Normal is the defect mold. So if you're outside of the normal, then there's something with it. And I don't think, hopefully no other people feel like that. But it's an odd thing. It makes you much more aware of how we operate as a people function and how we actually need to enable people, not just coming into the organizations, but thriving in that when you've got this diversity that comes through. And a lot of it is hidden. A lot of that disability is actually hidden. People don't see it.
And we talk a lot about diversity, inclusion, equal opportunities, and yet we still, as workplaces, have this image of what an employee looks like in our heads. And I remember speaking to someone at a HR conference, and it was along the lines of, we're an equal opportunities employer. Because you've got to be, haven't you? And I was like, what do you mean? What do you mean? Like immediately I started rolling my sleeves up and going, yeah, where's this going? I was like, what do you mean? He's like, well, you've got to be. I'm like, well, just because someone's got a disability doesn't undermine their capability. Mm-hmm. And yet it's still seen as a bit of a tick box exercise, I think, in many organizations.
Yeah. And look, it's one thing that everyone forgets is 15% of the world's population is disabled. 15%.
Wow.
That's a huge amount. Yet you don't see a huge amount being done to go, how do we enable people in the workplace? There's some sort of like, there's whitewashing on it and, a little bit of, tick boxing in some levels, but it's one of those things we need to continue to do better in, I think.
Yeah, and it can't simply be a policy anymore. It's got to be almost a humanitarian approach to making sure that we've got a workforce that serves the people that we serve, essentially. When did you move to New Zealand? Because New Zealand looms large there on your LinkedIn profile. So how did that come about?
Oh, well, there's this funny little story about the fact that I never really officially left home. My parents kept leaving me. Not kidding. When they moved to New Zealand, I'm like, is it something I said? Is there a message you need to be sending me here? So the reason I moved down to Oxford is because when we were living up north, my dad got a job down in Oxford. And at the time, this was back when all the houses were underwater and everything was you couldn't sell because it would just, you'd still be paying a mortgage. So they sort of effectively left me in the house. I sort of nominally rented the house and they moved down to Oxford and they were there for about 2 years. And in the end, there was a whole heap of stuff and I went, no, I'm just going to move to Oxford. So then I moved down to Oxford. And then about 3 years later, they moved to New Zealand. So yeah, I was like, is it me? I mean, really? Am I that bad a daughter? It was a bit along those lines. But, I ended up having the opportunity to follow my parents and my younger sister out to New Zealand. And I was like, yeah, I'm just going to do this. I'd never been ever, just, applied for my permanent residency, got that through and got on a plane. That was, and I did 20 years in New Zealand. So husband's Kiwi, kids are Kiwi.
You're firmly established now.
Oh, yeah. Also, New Zealand's tiny. Everybody knows everybody. It knows everybody else. It's 1 degree of separation generally.
It totally is. Every time I go back there, I always see someone I know. Whereas I could go out in the middle of Melbourne and not see anybody I know. There's always someone I know in New Zealand. And so did you start working in recruitment straight away? Was that your kind of pathway to people and culture now?
Yeah. So when I moved out to New Zealand, because I'd sort of set up this temp desk in the Oxford Job Centre, and I was dealing a lot with the agencies and they were like, you should do this as a job. You could do this as a job. And I was like, that sounds good. So when I hit New Zealand, I was like, okay, let's try this for size. So yeah, I spent years and I did. There's a lot of, in terms of the talent base, particularly in recruitment, because it is champagne and razor blades. But it's also addictive because you make a difference to people's lives. Like everybody will have that story of that one time with that one person. And then you go, it isn't just that person, it's you actually impacted whole families in terms of those times you fought for somebody to get a role, or, you got them an opportunity and they found their life passion and went on to be successful. I still have great joy of watching LinkedIn every now and again when people update their profiles and I'm like, yes! I love that. This is fabulous.
So I feel like I've got to ask this question on behalf of everybody listening, right? And I'm not expecting you to have the answer for everybody. But why is it when I apply to a recruitment agency, they never get back to me, Hassanah? Why? Is it just because they're inundated? Are they just got hundreds of applications for jobs all of the time?
No, it's you, mate. You're blacklisted. No, I'm not sure.
I had an inkling. Yeah.
Oh, look, it's the funniest thing because, oh my God, like hundreds of applications would be quite nice for mostly everybody these days. There's such a talent there. It's horrific, and it's going to be like this for 4 years at least. The reality is that you tend to find is that whether internal or external is that it's under-resourced. And there's a lot I'm passionate about HR tech.
Yeah.
A huge amount you can do with really good, well deployed, really well chosen HR tech, and it's like I'm passionate about it. But if you don't have the physical people with which to do that, you're going to have a problem. So there's an optimum point to it, and then you've got to have them well trained. Like you've really got to have them well trained. You can't just take somebody off the street because everybody thinks recruitment's so easy, and then give them a couple of months and then not off you go. That's how it fails. You've at the core of it, you've genuinely got to care. You've actually genuinely got to care, and you'll do the miles. You'll never get it perfectly. Do we all drop balls? Oh God, yes. When everyone goes, we need to fix candidate experience. I'm like, yeah, well, let's start admitting by the fact that none of us have got this nailed at all, and that we're trying every day to do it better.
And was it easy to transition because you worked as an external recruiter, and then you definitely went internal to work for Fletcher's, I think it was. Was that in Sydney?
Yeah, that was. Sydney? Yeah.
And was that an easy transition, or is it quite different, internal to external?
Oh, there's differences to it, but it's whether you wanted it. I wanted to go internal. And I was quite lucky. My boss at the time, fabulous man who I still love to bits and is still a mentor. He called me up and I was like, this is a great opportunity to go and do this. The aspect of being able to really make a difference because you're really close into the business, you really get that deep knowledge around the business. You get to really influence much more than you can do externally is just incredible. But if you don't have or can't develop strong relationship building skills, you're going to have a failure point in there. Also have to come at it from the fact that you are a business partner. You're not minion. It isn't a master-servant relationship. You're there to business partner because at the end of the day, a business is predicated on its budget or its EBITDA or whatever its targets look like on the physical people doing said work to make revenue, to make EBITDA. It starts with the people. And the role is to bring in really good people and train them and look after them and keep them going in a really good way. So the one thing I had the advantage of was that I did have good relationship skills at that point, scars probably from years in the external world, but you could develop that. If you can develop that, you'll be highly successful to actually do that. The downside to it is in agency land, you could hire, as Greg Savage puts them, the biker clients, the ones that drive you up the wall, will try hard to renegotiate the rates, will be a pain in the bum to deal with, will do the whole thing. They're the biker clients. You can actually say externally, hey, look, thanks ever so much, but I don't think we're for you. I'll recommend you to someone else. Ha ha ha. Bye-bye. Can't really do that internally. So, when you have that challenging hiring manager, you have to find a way to work with them effectively.
And so and talent acquisition, I think often people think of talent acquisition just as a shop, just that let me put it a different way. I joke about it. When people get talent acquisition wrong, they're just looking for someone with a pulse because their planning is so bad that they just need a bum on a seat or a person in a field with a heartbeat. Yeah. But talent acquisition done well really has a strong influence on the evolution of workplace culture, right? Yeah. It's about hiring people who share the same values, who you see as contributing. And that's where that business partnership comes in. Because you're almost like a bit of a sieve, are you, for people to make sure that you hire, people who will contribute? Is that fair?
Yeah, it's a filter and a high bar. So it should filter people to knowing that you're bringing people in that will be as successful as you can possibly make them inside the organization. and they've got great skills with which that you want to add them in. And then it's a bar that's around culture add. Yeah. So you want smart people, you want people with good IQs and good EQs, but you also don't want, the brilliant jerks. Yeah. You don't want them, which also means that, you've also got to have teams that are strong enough to have those conversations where it sort of pops up at some point in the interviewing process, and a hiring panel or hiring managers are all like, oh yeah, but they've got this, and it's like, yeah, and these were the other warning signs, yeah, but they can do this, and it's like, yeah, and they'll destroy your teams. Don't do that. And so you've got to be able to have that push and pull around it. And during that process is also a good time when you can actually deal with people having an aspect underneath it that is sitting around like a bias they don't know sitting in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I spoke to someone in the first season of the podcast. I spoke to someone from Zappos, and they said that the head of talent or the head of HR or head of people, whatever they call, they had the final say on recruitment, because I'd had a question, but can you spot brilliant jerks at the interview? And I said, well, you can, but often it's not the hiring manager that spots them. And that you almost need that level of independence to sort of sit down and go, here's the thing that I've spotted, and you're just going to have to trust me, because often people get blinded by people's technical ability and not necessarily the emotional ability, right?
Oh, absolutely. And look, I do know some organizations where they don't allow the hiring managers to have ultimate decision on who they hire. There's a pro and a con to it. It's a time and a place for each of the organizations. So some of those sit there. But personally, I get it. And sometimes it's done because you have too many, like, should we say, wonky decisions being made, or there's a lack of trust. The other end of it is like, well, you employ adults in an organization and you pay your leaders to be leaders, and ultimately they're the person making that choice. Whoever it is, at the end of the day, they're the person going, I made that choice for good and bad. It's on them. And if you think they're making bad decisions, then, well, give them better education about how to make good decisions. There's a bit for me where I'm like, it just doesn't necessarily sit well, but then it depends on the organization you're in and at the point in time.
It's such a good point, because I may have mentioned this before on another podcast that we're not very good at, organizations want lots of leaders, but we're not very good at training them how to become leaders. And that's just another great example of the bit that's missing. They don't know how to set expectations very well. They don't know how to performance manage people, and they don't know how to hire people in a way that contributes to culture. And you've done kind of talent roles. You went to NBN after Fletcher's. You worked in government for a while. Hassanah, I imagine you probably saw there was probably a common theme there around management or leadership development, I would have thought.
Oh, yeah. Generally, crappy leadership gets spotted eventually. Yeah, sometimes, I refer to it as the fact that, organizations will have organ rejection, but it's an eventually piece. Yeah. Sometimes some organizations will move fast, some of them move quite slow, and a lot of damage is done on there. It's the difficulty organizations have to go, this is what good leadership looks like, and this is how we help everybody else to get there and actually support people through it. That's a challenge. Yeah. If you think about most people in their careers, if you said the day you stepped into leadership role, how much training did you have as a leader? Most people are going to go, well, none. It's not like maybe there should be, but there's not like a pre-leadership course. It's like before you step into leadership, you can do a lot of things, but until you're there on that first day and how you operate is a lot down to how somebody might, approach it from a certain viewpoint. So a lot can go wrong, but a lot can go right if you give the right support. And then the other iteration that gets forgotten about is when people start being leaders of leaders. Yeah, I mean, that's actually quite hard. I do remember when I went into government, and it was a huge team. There was 90 plus in that team. So it was like biggest I'd ever managed, and I had a small, freak out about that. And I rang one of my mentors and I went, am I overreaching here? I mean, tell me bluntly. And he was always very straight about it. And I said, look, this is big. I'm leading leaders and leaders and leaders, because there's I've got TAMs and then I've got team leaders under that. And it's like, how do I do this well? And he went, look, Hassanah, you're a good leader. You know what good leadership looks like. Why do you think this looks any different? And I went, oh, yeah, good point. But he did also give me another piece of advice, which was very wise, which is don't have too many long fingers Yeah. So it's like, don't go reaching down into the organization and chopping the legs off your leaders underneath you. That's not a cool thing to do. It's like, you lead through them. You're leading leaders for them to lead, which is sometimes quite hard, but it's those things.
Yeah, that's good advice. I'm just thinking as well in the summary for this podcast is like Hassanah Rudd talks about long fingers and organ rejection.
I like to keep it visual for people.
Yeah. It's full of metaphors, let's keep it real, Hassanah. And then you joined Squiz and a global head of talent. So I'm interested in Squiz. So as an organization, maybe 20 years old, something like that. And kind of the role that you had, presumably in the time that you were there, it was about scaling culture as well. So, interested in the dynamics of your previous role within government into this kind of, youngish organization. What was that like?
Look, I loved that one. I absolutely did. It's a 20-year-old organization, still privately held in those areas, but it was fully into tech, which is where I wanted to go. And, I was insanely lucky. I had a fantastic boss, Helen Comerford. She's absolutely amazing, and a really great team with which to work with, like this tiny little people and talent team to it, and the global reach to it. And look, you were doing everything on the smell of an oily rag. You were having to get creative about how you did things. For me, it was great because it stretched me right across into much more the people and culture based roles and work, at which time I realized that I had to ring a few people back and apologize to them, namely some chief HR officers who over my years had said to me, you really need to go into people and culture. You need to go into PhD management. And I was like, no, not doing that. I spend my life with people and culture. Have you any idea what they do? Why would I want to do that? This is awful stuff, And so I had to ring them back and apologize, which was the fact that I realized that a lot of what you're doing is around the coaching with the leadership. Yes, there was those times where you're having to sit in with people having really hard conversations. That's there, but the rest of it is around that coaching and that guidance and that, chance to, for people to come and bounce with you, which was really cool. But I also got freedom, to experiment with lots of things. I managed to convince people to do some really interesting things because they were open to new ways of doing things and sort of scaling it up. And, working globally was fantastic. It was some very long days occasionally.
Lots of organizations would say, lots of people would say, oh, we don't have freedom to experiment, which I always challenge. It's about understanding priorities, right? And it's about recognizing where you have the time to do stuff. And it's about then creating the space for creative ideas. And presumably that's something you agree with.
Oh, yeah, completely. It doesn't stop you being creative around that. It doesn't stop you innovating around that. But you've got to understand what the business problem is you're trying to solve for. So if you hang it to that, you're away and laughing. You shouldn't just sit there and go, oh, well, this is how you get. The one thing I can't stand more than anything is, oh, well, we've always done it like this. It's like fingers on a blackboard to me. It's like saying, well, so the business just stopped and didn't move from like the 7th of March. Of course it did. But you'll also have strategies out there which you can hang the people stuff off. So if you tie it into that, of course you can try things. And generally, particularly within tech, it is around sprints and continuous improvements and, how you do, you put like agile balls together and how you run agile and how you do retros and like where you can bring in Lean Six Sigma. So if you talk the language of the business and you try some of these things and you make it enough that if you're not going to do too much damage, right? So you should have something where you could scale it quick if it works, but also turn it off, bury it, and never talk of it again if it doesn't work. I'm joking about never talking about it. You need to talk about it. But if you do little bits of that, occasionally not everything's going to work, and that's okay. But you can get the odd one where it's like, yes, scale it up. Oh, and also try and make the leaders look good. But you'll be fine.
Yeah, there is that too. Yeah. Well, and the things that fail or don't go so well, it's about extracting the learning from those and then extracting the learning from the stuff that goes well as well and saying, okay, well, here's a bit of a blueprint of things that we can do in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You've got to keep that together. But you also, to have an innovative culture, you've got to have people who are comfortable with vulnerability and trying things, because there's nothing more vulnerable than trying something new. Yeah, because the fear of failure and the fear of the shame around that is enormous and very human. So, I'd always encourage, anyone in a leadership role ever to talk about the things that they've done and it all fecked up, basically, and it all went wrong. And you don't have to go, oh, and then I turned it around like this. No, be honest about sometimes we do stuff and it doesn't go right. I still would, what I'd like, Colin? I want a failure conference. I want a failure conference with like senior leaders, and they come and talk about the stuff that just went wrong, because it makes it human and it makes it safe to try things.
Love it. I'll tell you what, I'll put it together. It might not come off, but at least we'll extract the learning from it for the next one. So now listen, I always knew you'd end up in a people and culture role, not least because you're great with people and your initials are HR. But I knew you would get there. So here we are at Bright. You've been at Bright 8 months. Tell me about the award. Tell me about the award.
Yeah, apparently there's even actually like a physical award.
No way.
No, seriously, there is. And I never win anything ever. So when these came round and, your applications go in and, you go, yeah, I'm never going to win that. There's no way. There's absolutely no way. So it generally was absolutely stunning. I think what was sad for the guys is that, they had this whole thing organised. So it was going to be a big gala event, black tie and, the whole thing. And of course, like Omicron, like knackered that up for everybody. It'll happen again in September, which will be really nice. But that was actually genuinely stunning.
And of course, and I'm always keen to say, and you'll echo this, is awards don't mean that you've got all the answers. Awards generally mean that you've done a couple of things, but you still got a bunch to figure out, right?
Yeah, constantly. And this is it. There's no blueprints either. I think sometimes where we go wrong is we go from organisation to organisation or change roles and we go, oh, well, I've done this before. I'm going to take this blueprint and overlay it onto this situation or this. It's not the case. Never the case. Like each place has got its own difficulties and opportunities for improvement, shall we say, in there that you need to uncover and really dig down to and then find a solution that's right for that. Sure, you can have some extra learnings, go, hang on, this is similar to something I did in the past. I can do this. But the other part to it is you might not, but somebody else in the network might. Reach out, ask people. Most people will help.
That's right. Yeah. So Bright, I've got a question to ask you about Bright, and then I'm going to let you go and get on with your day. So on a mission to make every home sustainable. That's the mission of the organization. I guess my last question is, kind of what's your advice for anybody that's looking to bring the mission to life, to live the vision on a daily basis? I see lots of organizations that have these long mission statements. I think Bright's fantastic, nice and short. Like even I could remember it, nice and short and memorable. In your experience, what's the best way to bring that vision to life, Hassanah?
Okay, the simplistic aspect is you've got to walk the talk. Yeah, it's no point having, mission statements or visions on a wall if nobody's actually walking the talk. The old thing of the behavior you walk past is the behavior that becomes your culture is really true to those levels. And also what you dial up as an organization and what you do. I will be really honest here. It's like, because we are on like huge hypergrowth, the organization's amazing. It's populated with the most intelligent people I've ever met in my life, which makes me feel like the most stupid person on a regular, which is not unusual, right? But also the most human and humble and really passionate about what we're doing and what we're actually making those changes to. That, people could take those roles in any other tech company, but when you rather say you help change the world, so you've got a real tie to those organizations. But you've also then got, we're on hypergrowth. January last year we were 80 staff. Fast forward a year, we're 210 and growing. So the numbers are going up and we're continuing to add new people in. And at the same time, you've also go, how do you scale culture? Because there's a core around Bright that is just so passionate and so exciting, and that how we operate together. But it's also, how do you scale culture? So here's the thing. I got this off an exec coach who's an amazing executive coach. I've known her for years and years and years. And I was talking to her last week around this. And I was like, how's a good way of doing this? And she said, every culture has got three things there's three things or rituals or something that our organization does that makes it what it is as a culture. She said, if you find those three things and you make sure they're replicated, your culture scales. And I was like, That's fantastic. That's fantastic. I love that. Yeah. So it's sort of like making sure you've got those pieces together to actually scale it up. But yeah, culture-wise, it's a caring and sharing organization. There's passion around it. There's incredible pace around it. And the people you work with are amazing. So I'm extraordinarily lucky. And again, like, I've been through a few, but my God, my boss, Kirsten's amazing. Our CEO and founder's amazing. Like, the people I've got within the people team are incredible. So I'm very lucky. I can't complain.
Well, look, as they say, is earned, Hassanah. I feel like I could speak to you for another half an hour, I have to be perfectly honest with you. It has been so great to have you on the Culture Makers podcast. And I'm sure it's not the last award that you'll win. I promise to take you out karaoke. So maybe I could win Best Singer and then donate it to you. Hassanah, thank you so much for joining us on Culture Makers podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you, Colin.
Thanks so much for listening to today's podcast. If you've enjoyed the show, please share the link with colleagues and friends or your connections on social media. Better still, why not keep the conversation going and join our community of culture makers for free? Share information from around the world on how to create a great place to work. You can join us at www.culturemakers.community.